Maggie Fairchild knew the bitter taste of broken promises the moment her father's lifeless body was dragged from the mine. Silver Creek, Arizona Territory, 1885, a place where men's words came cheap and their loyalties even cheaper. As she stood over his shallow grave, 18-year-old Maggie vowed she'd never again put her faith in a man's empty assurances. The silver mining town that had once represented hope now felt like a prison. 3 years later, at 21, Maggie had built a fragile independence running the town's only dressmaking shop. She'd taken over her father's small cabin on the outskirts of town, repaired its leaking roof, and learned to fire the old Colt revolver he'd left behind. Men in Silver Creek had learned to keep their distance from the fiery-haired seamstress with ice in her eyes. On this particular dusty August morning, Maggie was inspecting a bolt of calico when the shop bell jangled. She looked up to find Sheriff Collins standing awkwardly in her doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Fairchild," he nodded, "got some news you should hear." Maggie set down her scissors. "If it's about the widow Peterson's wedding dress, I've already told her I need another 2 days." "No, madam. It's about the Blackwater Mining Company. There's a lawyer in town, says they're finally paying settlements to families who lost folks in that collapse." The floor seemed to tilt beneath her. 3 years she'd waited for justice, for acknowledgement that her father had died because the company cut corners on support beams. 3 years of watching the mine owner, Harrison Wells, grow fat on silver while families like her scraped by. When was all she could manage. "Tomorrow at the courthouse, 10 o'clock. He shuffled his feet. "Thought you should know." After the sheriff left, Maggie locked the shop door and flipped the sign to "closed." Justice was finally within reach, but experience had taught her that justice and men's promises rarely aligned. The next morning, Maggie arrived at the courthouse wearing her finest dress, a navy blue cotton with modest lace trim that she'd made herself. The small courtroom was already crowded with miners, widows, and children. She recognized most of them, having sewn their mourning clothes 3 years earlier. A slick-haired man in an expensive suit stood at the front, flanked by the mine owner and 2 armed guards. Behind a small desk sat a pile of envelopes. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lawyer began with practiced smoothness, "Blackwater Mining Company extends its deepest condolences for your losses. While no amount can replace your loved ones, Mr. Wells has generously authorized compensation." One by one, families were called forward to receive envelopes and sign releases. When Maggie's name was called, she approached with her spine rigid as steel. "Miss Fairchild," the lawyer smiled thinly, "your settlement is $20 upon signing this waiver absolving Blackwater of all liability." $20. Maggie's voice came out stronger than she felt. "My father gave 15 years to that mine before it collapsed on him." The lawyer's smile never faltered. "The company has determined this amount based on your situation. As an adult with no dependents, you've suffered less hardship than others. This isn't compensation, it's an insult." Harrison Wells stepped forward, his substantial belly straining his brocade vest. "Now see here, Miss Fairchild, you should be grateful for any consideration. Your father knew the risks." Maggie's hand itched for the Colt hidden in her reticule. "The only risk he didn't account for was working for men without conscience. Either take the money or get out," Wells snapped, his face reddening. Maggie looked around at the other families, at their hollow-eyed children clutching those pitiful envelopes. Justice had never been on the table. "Keep your blood money," she said, turning on her heel. She was halfway to the door when it swung open, revealing a tall figure silhouetted against the harsh sunlight. The room fell quiet as the stranger stepped inside, removing his hat to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a storm-washed sky. "Pardon the interruption," he said, his voice carrying the slight drawl of Texas. "I'm looking for Harrison Wells." Wells puffed up like a threatened toad. "I'm Wells. Who's asking?" The stranger moved with a deceptive casualness that didn't fool Maggie. She recognized the watchful readiness in his stance, the controlled power in his movements. This was a man accustomed to danger. "Patrick Ryder," he answered. "I represent some investors from San Francisco. They're interested in your mine." A hungry gleam replaced Wells' irritation. "Well now, that's a different matter. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." As Wells led the stranger Ryder to a side room, Maggie caught the newcomer's gaze. For just a moment, something passed between them, a flash of recognition, though she was certain they'd never met. Outside, Maggie walked quickly toward her shop, her thoughts churning. The mockery of justice she'd witnessed burned in her chest. She was so distracted that she didn't notice the three men until they blocked her path. Miss Fairchild, the tallest one, sneered. He was one of Wells' foremen, a cruel man named Becker who'd tried to corner her once after her father's funeral. Causing trouble again, I see. Move aside, Maggie said, her hand slipping into her reticule. Boss says you need to learn your place. Becker stepped closer. Pretty girl like you shouldn't be alone. She's not alone. The voice came from behind her. Patrick Ryder stood a few paces away, his coat pushed back to reveal a holstered peacemaker. This isn't your concern, stranger, Becker growled. I'm making it my concern. Ryder's voice remained even, almost conversational. Three men threatening a lady in broad daylight seems like everyone's concern. Something in his tone made Becker hesitate. His eyes narrowed, calculating. We were just having a friendly chat, he finally said, backing away. No harm meant. Then you won't mind continuing it elsewhere. After a tense moment, Becker and his companions slouched off, tossing dark looks over their shoulders. Maggie released her grip on the Colt. I didn't need rescuing, Mr. Ryder. I believe you. His lips quirked slightly. But I thought it might save wear on that fine dress if you didn't have to shoot them. Despite herself, Maggie felt a reluctant smile tug at her mouth. Thank you, but I manage my own troubles. Of course. He fell into step beside her. Mind if I walk with you anyway? I'm new in town and could use directions. To where? Somewhere that serves decent food and doesn't water down the whiskey too badly. Try Ferguson's at the end of Main Street. Their stew is passable. They walked in silence for a moment before he spoke again. That wasn't right back there, what Wells offered you folks, Maggie stiffened. It wasn't unexpected, still not right. His voice had hardened. Men like that think money buys them immunity from decency. She stopped walking to study him. You said you represent investors interested in his mine. A shadow crossed his face. I say a lot of things, Miss Fairchild, so you're a liar then. Sometimes. He met her gaze directly, but not to you. Why should I believe that? You shouldn't, he said simply. Not yet. Before she could respond, he tipped his hat and strode away, leaving Maggie with the unsettling feeling that her carefully ordered life had just been knocked askew. That evening, Maggie closed her shop early. Her encounter with Patrick Ryder had left her restless. There was something about him, something beyond his obvious physical appeal that nagged at her. He had the easy confidence of a gunfighter, but spoke with the education of a gentleman, and the way he'd looked at Harrison Wells. She was locking the front door when she heard rapid footsteps. Turning, she saw young Tommy Evans, the blacksmith's son, running toward her. Miss Fairchild, he gasped. Come quick, there's a fire at the courthouse. Maggie followed the boy down the street. A crowd had already gathered, watching as flames licked the wooden structure. Sheriff Collins and a line of townspeople passed buckets, but it was clear the building couldn't be saved. What happened? She asked a woman standing nearby. Nobody knows for sure. Started in the record room, they say. Maggie scanned the crowd and found Harrison Wells standing apart, his face contorted with rage as he berated the lawyer from earlier. Nearby, leaning against a hitching post with casual unconcern, stood Patrick Ryder. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up. Even across the distance, Maggie felt the impact of those storm-gray eyes. He gave her a slight nod before pushing off the post and walking away from the commotion. The next morning, Silver Creek buzzed with speculation. The courthouse fire had destroyed all the mining company's records, including the liability waivers signed by the families. Without those documents, Blackwater's hasty settlements might be challenged. When Maggie opened her shop, she wasn't entirely surprised to find Patrick Ryder waiting outside. Morning, Miss Fairchild, he said pleasantly. Mr. Ryder, interesting coincidence about that fire. Very. His eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. Shame about those records. What do you want, Mr. Ryder? To hire the best seamstress in town. I'm in need of a new shirt. He held up a torn sleeve. Had a disagreement with a thorny bush on my ride in yesterday. Maggie hesitated before unlocking the door. I suppose I can manage that. Inside, she gestured him toward a stool while she gathered her measuring tape. She tried to maintain a professional demeanor as she recorded his measurements, but she was acutely aware of his presence, the clean scent of shaving soap, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "What really brings you to Silver Creek, Mr. Ryder?" she asked, measuring across his shoulders. "Patrick," he corrected, "and I told you I'm not lying to you. So you do represent investors, in a manner of speaking." He remained still as she worked. "I represent interests that find Harrison Wells' business practices problematic." Maggie moved around to face him. "Are you a lawman?" "No," a ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Though I've worked with them occasionally, I'm what you might call a problem solver." "Hired by whom?" "People who want justice, Miss Fairchild." "Maggie," she said, surprising herself. He nodded. "Maggie, then." She returned to her measurements, trying to ignore the warmth that spread through her at the way he said her name. "How long have you been on your own?" he asked. 3 years. She didn't elaborate. "That's a long time to carry everything yourself." Maggie's hands stilled. "I manage." "I've no doubt." His voice softened, but managing isn't the same as living. She stepped back, wrapping the measuring tape around her fingers. "Your shirt will be ready tomorrow afternoon. That'll be 50 cents. He stood, placing a silver dollar on her counter. "Keep the change, and Maggie." He paused at the door. "Be careful. Wells isn't the kind to take losses gracefully." After he left, Maggie tried to focus on her work, but her thoughts kept drifting to Patrick Ryder. Something about him both unsettled and intrigued her. He was dangerous, certainly, yet she'd felt safer in his presence than she had in years. That evening, Maggie was awakened by insistent knocking. She grabbed her father's Colt before approaching the door. "Who's there?" she called. "It's Sarah Jenkins, Miss Fairchild. Please, it's urgent." Maggie opened the door to find the widow Jenkins on her porch, trembling. "They're looking for him," Sarah whispered. "The stranger who came to town. Wells' men are searching everywhere." "Patrick Ryder, why?" "They're saying he started the fire, that he's working for a rival mining company." Sarah clutched Maggie's arm. "But that's not true, is it? He helped my Tommy bring our cow back yesterday when she got loose. He was kind." Before Maggie could respond, hoofbeats sounded on the road leading to her cabin. She quickly pulled Sarah inside and extinguished the lamp. Through a gap in the curtains, she watched 5 riders approach, Becker at their lead. They reined in about 20 yards from her door. "Check the barn," Becker ordered one of his men. Maggie's heart hammered. If they found Ryder assuming he was even here, which he wasn't, they wouldn't bring him in alive. And if they thought she was hiding him. A sudden movement in the shadows near the barn caught her eye. A tall figure slipped between the trees, moving away from the cabin. Patrick, he had been here. One of Becker's men emerged from the barn. "Nothing, boss." "Let's check the house," Becker said, dismounting. Maggie moved quickly, positioning Sarah behind her. "Stay quiet," she whispered, gripping the Colt. The pounding on her door shook the frame. "Open up, Fairchild, sheriff's business." "Sheriff Collins isn't with you, Becker," she called back, "and you have no right to be on my property. We're deputized to find a fugitive. Open up or we'll break it down." Maggie raised the Colt. "My father's claim deed gives me the right to defend this property against trespassers. I've got a loaded gun pointed at the door and I won't hesitate to use it." A tense silence followed. Maggie could almost feel Becker's frustration through the wooden door. "This isn't over, Fairchild," he finally growled. "When we find your friend, we'll be back for you too." The men remounted and rode away. Maggie waited until their hoofbeats faded before lowering the gun. "You can come out now," she said to the apparently empty room. After a moment, the door to the root cellar in the floor creaked open. Patrick Ryder climbed out, brushing dust from his clothes. "How did you know?" he asked. "I didn't for certain." Maggie helped Sarah to a chair. The older woman looked pale, "But it seemed likely you'd need somewhere to hide, and my place is isolated enough." "I wouldn't have involved you if I'd had a choice," he said. "They were closer than I expected." "What did you do exactly?" Maggie demanded. "Nothing they can prove." His eyes held her steadily, but enough to make Wells nervous. Sarah Jenkins looked between them. "Did you start that fire, Mr.?" Patrick turned to the widow. "Madam, would it trouble you more to think I did or didn't?" The woman considered this. I suppose what troubles me is that my Henry died for nothing and those men nearly got away with it." "Then let's leave it at that." He touched her hand gently. "Sometimes justice takes unexpected forms." Maggie poured coffee while they discussed options. Sarah agreed to return home. It would look suspicious if she stayed, but promised to send word if she heard anything useful. After she left, Maggie faced Patrick across her small table. "You're playing a dangerous game." I didn't start playing until they made the rules. He sipped his coffee. Wells has been running mines like this for years, cutting corners, bribing officials, silencing complaints. When the Silver Creek mine collapsed, it wasn't his first deadly accident. So you are working for a rival company, he shook his head. I'm working for 12 families in Colorado who lost fathers and sons in another of Wells' mines. They pooled what little they had to hire me after the law failed them. You're a gun for hire then. I prefer agent of justice, he said with a hint of a smile. But yes, sometimes that involves guns and fires. He met her gaze directly. I don't harm innocent people, Maggie, but I don't weep for ledgers that hide blood money either. Maggie studied him in the lamplight. His face showed the lines of a man who'd seen hardship but hadn't surrendered to bitterness. Something in her responded to that resilience. You can't stay here, she said finally. It's the first place they'll look when they circle back. I know. He stood, gathering his hat. I've got a camp in the hills. I'll lay low for a day or two, then make my next move. What move? What's your plan? He hesitated. The less you know, the safer you'll be. I'm already involved, she pointed out. They saw me defend you. Fair enough. Patrick sat back down. Wells doesn't just own the mine. He controls the bank that holds most of the mortgages in town, including loans to businesses. He's been squeezing people dry while paying starvation wages at the mine. Everyone knows that. What they don't know is that he's been operating without proper permits for years. The territorial governor issued new safety regulations after the last major collapse, but Wells bribed inspectors to look the other way. That would shut down the mine, Maggie realized. Exactly. And force him to implement proper safety measures before reopening. Patrick leaned forward. I have documents proving the bribery. I was planning to get them to the territorial marshal, but Wells must have gotten wind of it. How can I help? The words slipped out before Maggie could stop them. For 3 years, she'd kept her head down, focused on survival. Now she was volunteering to fight the most powerful man in the territory. Patrick looked surprised, then concerned. It's too risky. You've already done enough by hiding me. My father died in that mine, Maggie said quietly. If there's a chance to make Wells really pay, then I want to be part of it. He studied her for a long moment. I need to get a message to the marshal's office in Tucson. Wells will have men watching the telegraph office and the stagecoach. I make monthly trips to Tucson for supplies, Maggie offered. Nobody would question it if I went a few days early. Patrick shook his head. Wells' men will be watching you now, too. Not if they think you've left the area. A plan was forming in Maggie's mind. If they see you ride out, they'll follow, creating a diversion. He nodded slowly. It could work, but it would have to be convincing. Then let's make it convincing. The next morning, Maggie opened her shop as usual. She served her regular customers, carefully avoiding any mention of the courthouse fire or Patrick Ryder. Around noon, Sarah Jenkins came in, ostensibly to order a new apron. They're still searching, she whispered as Maggie measured fabric, but they're focusing on the North Road now. Someone reported seeing a rider heading that way before dawn. Good, Maggie murmured. When you leave, mention loudly that you're glad things are getting back to normal. Sarah performed admirably, declaring to the entire shop that she was relieved the excitement was over and that dangerous stranger was gone. The news spread through town exactly as Maggie had hoped. That evening, she closed early and headed home with a bundle of Patrick's newly repaired shirt wrapped in plain paper. As she approached her cabin, she tensed, sensing someone's presence, but it was only Patrick, emerging from the shadows of her porch. You shouldn't be here, she hissed, hurriedly unlocking her door. Someone could see you. I needed to confirm our plan, he said once they were inside, and to give you this. He handed her a sealed envelope. The evidence, names, dates, amounts, enough to convince the marshal to investigate. Maggie tucked it into her sewing basket. I'll leave for Tucson tomorrow. The stagecoach departs at noon. Patrick nodded. I'll create a distraction around 10, just enough time for Wells to send his men after me before you board. Where will you go? North first to leave a trail. Then I'll circle back and head south. I know places to hide. He took the package from her hands. My shirt. Yes, she watched as he unwrapped it. I reinforced the tier and added an extra button. Patrick ran his fingers over her neat stitches. Fine work, thank you. An awkward silence fell between them. Maggie was acutely aware that this might be the last time she saw him. "Will you go back to Colorado after this?" she asked finally. "To report success, yes, after that." He shrugged. "There's always another fight somewhere. A lonely life. Sometimes." His eyes met hers. "What about you? Will you stay in Silver Creek?" Maggie hadn't considered anything else. "It's my home." "Is it, or just somewhere you've survived?" The question struck deeper than she expected. Was Silver Creek truly home, or merely the place she'd been stranded when her world collapsed? "I don't know," she admitted. "I haven't thought beyond tomorrow for a long time." Patrick stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. Whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. They both froze, listening as the riders passed on the main road, continuing toward town. "Just a patrol," Patrick said, moving to the window, "but I should go. Dawn comes early." He gathered his hat. At the door, he turned back. "Be careful tomorrow. If anything feels wrong, don't get on that stage. The evidence can wait." "I'll be fine." She lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of Harrison Wells." "That's what worries me." His expression softened. "You're the bravest woman I've ever met, Maggie Fairchild. Probably the most stubborn, too." Before she could respond, he did something unexpected. He took her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gesture from another time, another world. "For luck," he said quietly, and then he was gone, melting into the darkness like a man who'd spent his life moving through shadows. Maggie stood in the doorway long after he disappeared, her hand tingling where his lips had touched it. For the first time in years, she felt something other than anger or resignation stirring in her heart. It was an uncomfortable, forgotten feeling, hope, perhaps, or something even more dangerous. The next morning dawned clear and hot, a typical Arizona summer day. Maggie packed a small valise with enough clothing for 3 days in Tucson. Beneath the carefully folded garments, she tucked Patrick's envelope. As an extra precaution, she sewed it into the lining of a plain cotton nightgown. At 9:30, she locked her cabin and began the walk to town. The stagecoach depot was already busy with travelers and locals milling about. Maggie purchased her ticket and took a seat on a bench outside, positioning herself to see down the main street. At precisely 10 o'clock, a commotion erupted from the direction of the saloon. Shouts and the sound of breaking glass drew everyone's attention. Moments later, Patrick Ryder burst through the batwing doors, followed by 3 angry men. He sprinted to a horse tied nearby, vaulting into the saddle with fluid grace. Even from a distance, Maggie could see his wild grin as he wheeled the horse around and galloped north, bullets kicking up dust at his heels. The town exploded into action. Becker and several other men rushed from the sheriff's office, quickly mounting and thundering after the fugitive. Harrison Wells himself emerged from the bank, red-faced and bellowing orders. Maggie allowed herself a small smile. Patrick had created exactly the diversion they needed, dramatic enough to pull attention away from the stage depot, but not so excessive as to delay the coach's departure. By the time the stagecoach was loaded and ready at noon, nearly every able-bodied man in Wells' employ had joined the pursuit north. Only one guard remained at the depot, looking bored and irritated at missing the excitement. As Maggie climbed aboard, she felt a momentary pang of worry for Patrick. He was outnumbered and pursued by men who wouldn't hesitate to shoot him on sight, but she reminded herself that he was clearly experienced at evasion. He would be fine. The journey to Tucson took 6 dusty, uncomfortable hours. By the time they arrived, Maggie was tired and saddle-sore, but determined. She took a room at a modest boarding house and washed away the road dust before setting out for the marshal's office. Marshal James Wilson was a graying man with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. He listened without interruption as Maggie explained the situation and presented Patrick's evidence. "This is serious business, Miss Fairchild," he said when she finished. "Harrison Wells has powerful friends in the territorial government." "Are they powerful enough to ignore 12 dead miners?" Maggie challenged. "Or the dozens more at risk every day he operates without proper safety measures?" The marshal studied the documents again. "No," he said finally. "They're not, but building a case will take time. People in Silver Creek don't have time. Wells controls everything: the mine, the bank, even some of the businesses. He's been bleeding the town dry." "I understand your frustration, but the law moves at its own pace." While it's moving, people are suffering, Maggie insisted. At least send someone to investigate officially. That alone might make Wells nervous enough to improve conditions. Marshal Wilson considered this. I could dispatch a deputy within the week. Not to make arrests yet, just to ask questions, observe conditions, verify these claims. It wasn't everything Maggie had hoped for, but it was a start. Thank you, Marshal. As she stood to leave, Wilson asked, this Ryder fellow the one who gathered the evidence. Where is he now? I don't know, Maggie answered honestly. He created a diversion so I could leave town safely. The Marshal's expression was unreadable. Interesting man, taking on Wells like this. Tell him if you see him again that I'd like to talk. Might be other operations that could use his attention. Maggie spent 2 days in Tucson, purchasing supplies for her shop and herself. She tried not to worry about Patrick or what might be happening back in Silver Creek, but her thoughts constantly returned to both. On the 3rd day, she boarded the stagecoach for the return journey, her mission accomplished but her mind uneasy. What if Patrick hadn't escaped Wells' men? What if they'd connected her to him more definitively than she realized? The stagecoach had just passed the halfway point to Silver Creek when the driver called out and the vehicle lurched to a stop. Maggie tensed, her hand going to the small derringer she'd concealed in her pocket. The door swung open, but instead of a bandit's face, she saw Patrick Ryder grinning at her. Room for one more? He asked, climbing aboard before anyone could object. He settled onto the seat beside her as the coach lurched forward again. What are you doing here? She hissed, mindful of the other passengers' curious glances, making sure you get home safely. His voice was low. Wells has men watching the roads. They're particularly interested in returning travelers from Tucson. Maggie's stomach tightened. He suspects. He knows something's happening. The marshal sent a telegram yesterday, informing him of a pending investigation. Wells isn't taking it well. How did you avoid his men when they chased you? Patrick's eyes crinkled with amusement. I've had practice. Led them on a merry chase north for a day, then doubled back while they were still searching a canyon I never entered. The coach hit a rut, jostling the passengers. Patrick's arm automatically moved to steady Maggie, his hand warm against her side. She found herself leaning into him slightly before catching herself. The marshal said to tell you he'd like to speak with you sometime, she murmured. I think he has other work for someone with your skills. Did he now? Patrick looked thoughtful. Might be nice to operate with the law's blessing for a change. The rest of the journey passed in tense silence. As they approached Silver Creek, Patrick pulled his hat lower over his eyes and adjusted his coat to better conceal his holstered revolver. Let me get off first, he instructed as the stagecoach slowed. Find a friend to escort you home, don't go alone. I can manage, please, Maggie. The intensity in his eyes silenced her protest. Just for tonight, Wells is unpredictable when cornered. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in front of the depot. Patrick disembarked quickly, vanishing into the gathering dusk without a backward glance. Maggie followed more slowly, scanning the crowd for familiar faces. She spotted Sarah Jenkins with her son and beckoned to them. Maggie. Thank goodness you're back, Sarah exclaimed, embracing her. Things have been so strange here. Strange how? Maggie asked as they walked, Tommy trailing behind with her valise. Wells has been raging about spies and conspirators. Yesterday, he fired 3 miners just for mentioning the safety of the support beams. Sarah lowered her voice. And last night, someone tried to break into your shop. Maggie quickened her pace. Was anything taken? No, Sheriff Collins heard the noise and investigated. The lock was damaged, but they didn't get in. Sarah squeezed her arm. He posted a deputy to watch it last night. When they reached the shop, Maggie was relieved to find it intact, though the door frame showed signs of attempted forced entry. She thanked Sarah and Tommy, promising to visit the next day with the fabric she'd purchased in Tucson. Inside, Maggie lit lamps and checked that nothing had been disturbed. She was examining the damaged lock when a soft knock sounded at the back door. Heart pounding, she retrieved her father's Colt before approaching. Who's there? She called. It's me. Patrick's voice was barely audible. She opened the door quickly, ushering him inside. In the lamplight, she could see a dark bruise forming along his jawline. What happened? Minor disagreement with one of Wells' lookouts. He touched the bruise gingerly. He got worse. You shouldn't be here, Maggie said, though she was relieved to see him. If they're watching my shop, they were. I took care of it. He accepted the wet cloth she offered, pressing it to his face. The marshal's deputy arrives tomorrow. Wells knows that he received the telegram this afternoon. That's good, isn't it? It should be. Patrick's expression was troubled, but cornered rats are dangerous. I'm concerned he might try something desperate tonight. As if summoned by his words, the front windows of the shop exploded inward in a shower of glass. Flames licked at the curtains as a burning bottle rolled across the floor. Patrick reacted instantly, grabbing Maggie and pulling her toward the back door. Go, run. Another bottle crashed through the back window, igniting the bolts of fabric stored there. Within seconds, the small shop was engulfed in flames. Coughing against the smoke, Patrick kicked open the jammed back door. They stumbled into the alley, the heat of the fire searing against their backs. My shop, Maggie gasped, turning back in horror. Patrick caught her arm. Nothing you can do now. We need to get away before they realize we were inside. A shout from the street confirmed his fears. There they are, don't let them escape. They ran through the darkened alley, emerging onto a side street. The town was coming alive with shouts as people noticed the fire. Patrick pulled Maggie toward the livery stable. We need horses, he said grimly. It's not safe for you here anymore. The stable boy was already awake, alarmed by the commotion. Patrick pressed coins into his hand. 2 of your fastest, it's an emergency. The boy worked quickly, saddling a bay gelding and a dappled mare. As they mounted, the sound of pursuit grew closer. Head east, Patrick instructed as they rode out. Toward the hills. I know a place we can hide until the deputy arrives. They galloped through the night, leaving Silver Creek and its burning building behind. Maggie's heart ached for her shop, her livelihood, her independence, but a strange exhilaration also coursed through her. For the first time in years, she wasn't just surviving, she was fighting back. After an hour's hard riding, they reached a small canyon nestled in the foothills. Patrick led them along a nearly invisible path that wound upward, eventually opening into a sheltered clearing with a crude cabin tucked against the rock face. What is this place? Maggie asked as they dismounted. Old prospectors claim, abandoned years ago. Patrick led the horses to a lean-to shelter. I found it while scouting the area. Nobody comes here anymore. Inside, the cabin was spare but sound. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple furnishings, a table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed occupied the single room. You've been staying here, Maggie realized, noting the coffee pot on the hearth and the bedroll on the floor beside the bed. Patrick nodded, lighting a lamp. It's served me well. I'm sorry about your shop, Maggie. The mention of her shop brought reality crashing back. Maggie sank onto one of the chairs, the magnitude of her loss finally hitting her. Everything I had was in that shop, she whispered. My fabric, my patterns, my livelihood, even my father's few mementos were in the back room. Patrick crouched before her, taking her hands in his. We'll make Wells pay for this too, I promise you. Maggie met his gaze. Don't make promises, Mr. Ryder. I've had my fill of men's promises. Then trust my actions first, he said softly. Judge me by what I do, not what I say. The echo of his words from their first meeting wasn't lost on her. She pulled her hands away, suddenly conscious of their isolation and proximity. I should sleep, she said, standing. It's been a long day. Patrick immediately moved to the bedroll on the floor. Take the bed. I'll keep watch for a while anyway. Maggie was too exhausted to argue. She removed her boots and outer jacket before lying down on the narrow bed. Despite her physical and emotional exhaustion, sleep eluded her. She was acutely aware of Patrick's presence as he moved quietly about the cabin, checking the windows, adding wood to the small fire. Patrick, she said after a while. He turned from his position by the window. Yes, why are you doing this? Not just for me, but for all of it, the miners, the evidence, fighting Wells. What made you take up this kind of life? He was silent so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he came and sat in the chair near the bed. My father was a miner, he said quietly. In Pennsylvania, coal country. The company worked him until his lungs gave out, then tossed him aside with nothing. I was 15. I'm sorry, he acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. My mother tried to keep us going, but times were hard. My sister took sick that winter. We couldn't afford medicine. Maggie could guess the rest. You lost her. 2 days before Christmas. His voice remained steady, but pain shadowed his eyes. After we buried her, I left home, worked my way west, took whatever jobs I could find, discovered I had certain skills that people would pay for. Fighting skills. At first, yes, I was young and angry, he smiled faintly. But I learned that brains beat brawn most times, started using my head more than my fists, found I had a talent for getting into places, discovering secrets, exposing lies. A spy of sorts. I prefer agent of justice, he reminded her with a hint of his usual humor. 5 years ago, I was hired to investigate a mine collapse in Colorado. Conditions identical to your father's mine, inadequate supports, ignored safety regulations, corrupt inspectors. 12 men died. The families who hired you, he nodded. I followed the ownership trail. It led to Harrison Wells. I've been tracking his operations ever since, building a case strong enough that even his political connections couldn't save him. And now, Maggie asked softly, now we've done it. His eyes met hers. The marshal's evidence, combined with Wells' reaction tonight burning your shop, was the act of a desperate man. He's finished. What happens after? To you, I mean. Patrick looked away, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. I move on. Find another fight that needs fighting. Always alone, the question hung in the air between them. Patrick turned back to her, something vulnerable and unguarded in his expression. It's been that way for a long time, he said quietly. Safer, simpler, lonelier, she added. Yes. He studied her face in the flickering light. But perhaps it doesn't always have to be. Maggie felt her heart quicken at his words. For years, she'd armored herself against exactly this connection, vulnerability, trust. Yet something about this man, with his quiet strength and unwavering moral compass, made her want to lower her defenses. I should let you sleep, Patrick said, rising from the chair. Dawn's not far off. He returned to his position by the window, and eventually Maggie drifted into an uneasy slumber. She awoke to sunlight streaming through the cabin's small windows and the smell of coffee. Patrick stood at the fireplace, pouring the dark liquid into 2 tin cups. Morning, he said, offering her one. Sleep well. Well enough. She accepted the cup gratefully. What's the plan for today? The marshal's deputy should be arriving in Silver Creek this morning. Once he's had time to assess the situation, we'll ride back and meet with him. Patrick sat across from her. Wells won't dare try anything with a federal lawman in town. You seem confident. I am. He sipped his coffee. Wells is finished, Maggie. He just doesn't know it yet. They spent the morning preparing for the return to town. Patrick taught Maggie how to use the peacemaker he carried as a backup weapon in case they encountered trouble on the ride back. You're a natural, he commented as she hit the makeshift target he'd set up. Good eye. My father taught me to shoot his Colt when I was 16, she explained. Said a woman alone should know how to defend herself. Wise man. They set out for Silver Creek shortly after noon, riding at a more measured pace than their desperate flight the night before. Patrick remained vigilant, frequently scanning the horizon and surrounding hills. As they approached town, smoke still rose from where Maggie's shop had stood. The sight sent a fresh pang through her heart. Everything I worked for, she murmured. Patrick reached across to touch her arm. You'll rebuild, I'll help you. The unexpected offer caught her off guard. You're planning to stay in Silver Creek. Before he could answer, they heard riders approaching from the south. Patrick's hand moved to his revolver, but he relaxed when he saw the official badges on the approaching men's chests. Marshal Wilson, he called in greeting. I didn't expect to see you personally. The marshal reined in beside them, accompanied by 2 deputies. Ryder, should have known you'd be mixed up in this. He nodded to Maggie. Miss Fairchild, sorry about your shop. You know each other? Maggie looked between the 2 men in surprise. We've crossed paths a time or two, Wilson acknowledged. Ryder has an unconventional approach to justice, but his heart's in the right place. What's happening in town? Patrick asked, ignoring the marshal's characterization. Quite a bit, Wilson said grimly. Harrison Wells tried to flee this morning when he heard I was coming. One of my deputies caught him at the stage depot with a valise full of cash and company documents. He's been arrested. Maggie could hardly believe it. In custody, yes. Along with his foreman Becker and 2 others for the arson of your shop. A young stable boy witnessed them preparing the fire bottles. Relief washed over Maggie. And the mine, closed pending inspection, Wilson confirmed. I've sent for a federal mining inspector from Phoenix. The bank will be audited as well. Patrick's shoulders relaxed subtly. It's over then. The immediate danger, yes. Wilson fixed him with a pointed look. Though there's the matter of certain, irregular activities conducted during your investigation, courthouse fires, for instance. Strange coincidence that, Patrick said blandly. Fortunate that no one was harmed, the marshal snorted. Fortunate indeed, I'm willing to overlook certain coincidences considering the greater good that's been accomplished. He turned to Maggie. Town council's meeting this afternoon to discuss assistance for rebuilding your shop, Miss Fairchild. You might want to attend. They rode into Silver Creek together, drawing curious stares from townspeople. News of Wells' arrest had already spread, and there was a palpable sense of relief in the air. At the town hall, Maggie was overwhelmed by the community's response. Miners' families, many of whom she'd helped with reduced prices or delayed payments over the years, pledged labor to rebuild her shop. The hardware store owner offered materials at cost. Even Sheriff Collins, looking somewhat chastened, promised to personally oversee security during the reconstruction. People respect you, Patrick observed as they left the meeting. They remember your kindnesses. I never expected this, Maggie admitted, touched by her neighbor's generosity. I've kept to myself so much since my father died. Sometimes we build walls thinking we're protecting ourselves, when really we're just cutting ourselves off from the help we need. His gaze was thoughtful. I've been guilty of the same. They walked slowly toward the hotel where Maggie would stay until temporary accommodations could be arranged. The evening air was cooling, bringing relief after the hot day. What will you do now? She asked, pausing outside the hotel entrance. Patrick studied her face in the gathering dusk. That depends. On what, on you? He stepped closer. Marshal Wilson offered me a position as a special investigator for the territorial governor, other mining operations, land fraud cases, that sort of thing. You'd be working for the law. Maggie couldn't hide her surprise, officially this time. A smile played at his lips. The position would be based in Tucson but would require travel throughout the territory, including Silver Creek, especially Silver Creek if there was a reason to visit regularly. His eyes held her steadily. Would there be, Maggie? Her heart pounded as she understood his meaning. I don't trust easily, Patrick, you know that. I do. He took her hand gently. So I'll say again what I told you that first day. Don't trust my words, trust my actions first. And what actions would those be? Helping you rebuild your shop, returning to check on you whenever my work allows, proving through time and consistency that not all men break their promises. His voice softened. And perhaps, eventually, showing you that it's possible to build something permanent, something true. Maggie felt the walls she'd constructed around her heart begin to crack. This man, with his quiet strength and unwavering principles, had already breached her defenses in ways no one else had since her father died. It would be a long road, she warned. The worthwhile ones usually are. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his touch gentle. I'm a patient man, Maggie Fairchild. In that moment, with the last light of day gilding his features, Maggie made a decision. She reached up and touched his bruised jawline lightly. Then I suppose you should come back to Silver Creek often, she said softly. To check on your investment in the town's rebuilding. His smile warmed his entire face. I believe I will. 3 months later, Maggie stood in her newly rebuilt shop, arranging bolts of fabric on the shelves. The building was larger than before, with better light and a proper fitting room. The town council, free from Wells' influence, had approved a loan with generous terms, and the miners had contributed labor on their days off. The bell over the door jingled, and she looked up to see Patrick entering, trail dust still on his coat. Her heart leapt at the sight of him, as it had each time he'd returned over the past months. Right on schedule, she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. I keep my promises. He removed his hat, crossing to where she stood. The shop looks better every time I visit. We're officially reopening tomorrow. She gestured proudly at the well-stocked shelves. The miners' wives have been placing orders for weeks. I brought you something. Patrick reached into his coat and withdrew a small package, a reopening gift. Maggie unwrapped it carefully to find a beautiful silver thimble engraved with her initials. It's lovely, she breathed, slipping it onto her finger. There's an inscription inside, he said, watching her closely. She removed it and tilted it toward the light to read the tiny words. Trust builds slowly. Patrick. She looked up at him, touched by the sentiment. I know it takes time, he said quietly. I just want you to know I'm not going anywhere. These past 3 months had proven the truth of his words. Every promise he'd made, he'd kept. Each time he said he'd return by a certain date, he appeared precisely when expected. He'd helped with the rebuilding, advocated for her with the town council, and kept her informed of the legal proceedings against Wells, who now awaited trial in Tucson. Slowly, cautiously, Maggie had allowed herself to trust not blindly, but based on the consistent evidence of his actions. I have news, Patrick said, taking her hands in his. The governor has appointed me to oversee the reorganization of several mining operations throughout the territory, including the Silver Creek mine. I'll be based here for at least 6 months. You're staying, Maggie couldn't hide her delight. In Silver Creek, yes, his eyes held hers. I've rented a cabin just outside town, nothing fancy but it's sound. The old Jensen place, he nodded. It needs work, but the location is perfect, close enough to town for convenience, far enough for privacy. I'm glad you're staying, Maggie said softly. There's something else. Patrick's expression grew serious. Something I've wanted to ask since I returned last month, but it seemed too soon. Maggie's heart quickened. Yes, would you have dinner with me tonight? Not at the hotel restaurant or Ferguson's, but at my cabin. I'm a decent cook when I have the chance. His gaze was hopeful. A proper dinner, just the two of us. The invitation represented a step forward in their cautiously evolving relationship. Until now, they'd shared meals in public places or with others present. This would be different, more personal, more intimate. I'd like that, Maggie answered, surprising herself with how easily the acceptance came. That evening, Patrick arrived at the hotel to escort her to his cabin. They rode the short distance as the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the landscape. The cabin was simple but welcoming, with a fire burning in the hearth and the table set for two. Patrick had clearly made an effort, with a clean tablecloth and wildflowers in a mason jar as a centerpiece. It's not fancy, he apologized, taking her shawl. It's perfect, she assured him. The dinner he prepared, venison stew, fresh biscuits, and apple cobbler, proved his claim of being a decent cook. They talked easily throughout the meal, sharing stories and laughter in a way that felt both novel and comfortingly familiar. After dinner, they sat before the fire, the conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. Maggie found herself relaxing completely in his presence for the first time, the wariness she usually maintained falling away. I've been thinking about something the marshal said, Patrick remarked, refilling their coffee cups, about building walls that end up cutting us off from help. I've thought about that too, Maggie admitted. After my father died, I was so determined to rely only on myself that I pushed everyone away. I did the same after my sister died. Patrick's expression was reflective, convincing myself I was stronger alone when really I was just afraid. Afraid of what? Losing someone else I cared for. His eyes met hers across the firelight, of being vulnerable again. Maggie nodded, understanding perfectly. It's safer not to care too deeply. Safer, yes. Patrick set his cup down and moved to sit beside her, but I'm beginning to think that safety isn't everything. The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken feelings. Patrick reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. What are you afraid of now, Maggie? He asked softly. She considered the question honestly. That I'll trust and be betrayed again, that I'll let myself care and end up alone. And if I promised that wouldn't happen, I'd say promises are just words. He smiled at that. Then I won't promise. I'll simply keep showing up day after day until my actions have spoken so loudly that words become unnecessary. Maggie felt something shift inside her, a softening of the barriers she'd maintained for so long. I think they're beginning to. Patrick's hand cradled her cheek gently. May I kiss you, Maggie Fairchild? Instead of answering, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deepened as years of loneliness and guarded emotions gave way to something new and hopeful. When they finally parted, Patrick rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the day we met, he confessed. Even when I was pointing a gun at you, she teased, especially then. He kissed her again, briefly. Your fierceness was the first thing I admired about you. Your strength, your resilience. But it's your heart, Maggie, that's what I've come to love. The word hung between them, new and fragile. Maggie felt her own heart respond to it, unfurling like a flower long kept in darkness. I'm not ready to say it back, she whispered honestly. Not yet. I know. His smile was understanding. I didn't say it expecting to hear it returned. I said it because it's true and I wanted you to know. Maggie touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. Keep showing up, Patrick Ryder. Keep proving it with your actions. Every day, he promised. Over the following months, Silver Creek transformed. With wells awaiting trial and the mine under new management with proper safety measures, the town began to prosper. Wages increased, working conditions improved, and businesses flourished. Maggie's shop thrived in its new location. She hired 2 assistants, young women eager to learn the trade, and expanded her offerings to include ready-made garments for miners and their families. Patrick's work kept him busy supervising the mine reorganization, but he always made time for Maggie. Their relationship deepened gradually, built on a foundation of respect and proven reliability. One evening in early spring, nearly a year after they'd first met, Patrick took Maggie riding to a hilltop overlooking the valley. A picnic basket was tied to his saddle and a blanket spread beneath a solitary oak tree. As they ate and watched the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues, Patrick seemed unusually quiet. What are you thinking about? Maggie asked, leaning against his shoulder. The future. He turned to face her. My appointment here ends next month. Maggie felt a chill despite the mild evening. Will you be leaving Silver Creek? That depends entirely on you. He took her hand. The marshal has offered me a permanent position as territorial investigator. I could be based anywhere I choose. And where would you choose? Wherever you are. Patrick's eyes held her steadily. I love you, Maggie. I want to build a life with you here in Silver Creek in Tucson, wherever you want to be, but I won't ask you to leave your home if you're not ready. Maggie's heart swelled. Over the past year, she'd watched this man keep every promise, large and small. He'd proven himself through consistent actions, unwavering support, and steadfast loyalty. Day by day, brick by brick, he dismantled her walls and built something stronger in their place trust. My home isn't a place anymore, she said softly. It's wherever you are. Patrick's face lit with hope. Does that mean? It means I love you too. The words felt right, true as she spoke them for the first time. And I trust you, Patrick Ryder, not just your actions now, but your words too. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. I've carried this for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond. Marry me, Maggie, tears pricked her eyes as she nodded. Yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then gathered her into his arms. As they kissed beneath the spreading oak, Maggie knew that the walls she'd built around her heart hadn't made her strong, they'd only kept her isolated. Real strength had come in the risk of trusting again, in opening herself to love despite the fear. Where shall we live? She asked later as they rode home hand in hand in the gathering twilight. Silver Creek, Tucson. I was thinking about that cabin, Patrick suggested. The Jensen place. I've been fixing it up all these months. With some expansion, it could be a real home. Close enough to town for my business, far enough for privacy, Maggie smiled, echoing his earlier description. It sounds perfect. They were married a month later in Silver Creek's small church. The entire town turned out for the celebration, from miners and their families to Marshall Wilson, who traveled from Tucson for the occasion. Sarah Jenkins wept openly during the ceremony, later telling Maggie, "Your father would be so proud to see you happy." The newlyweds settled into the cabin, which Patrick had indeed expanded with a larger kitchen and a second bedroom for the future, as he put it with a meaningful smile. Maggie continued her dressmaking business, while Patrick established his office in town, serving as the territorial investigator for the western counties. His work occasionally required travel, but he never stayed away longer than promised, always returning exactly when he said he would. On their first anniversary, they sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset just as they had the evening of his proposal. Any regrets? Patrick asked, his arm around her shoulders. Maggie leaned into him, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her stomach where their child grew. Not one, you, only that I didn't find you sooner. He kissed her temple. Though perhaps we both needed those years apart to be ready when we did find each other. Trust builds slowly, Maggie quoted the inscription from the silver thimble she still used daily. But lasts forever, Patrick added, completing what had become their private motto. As darkness fell over the Arizona landscape, Maggie reflected on the journey that had brought them here from a broken-hearted young woman who couldn't trust, and a lonely man fighting others' battles, to partners building a life together. They had forged something rare and precious from the pain of their pasts, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, patience, and love proven through actions. The walls she had built to protect herself had become the foundation of something far stronger: a home, a family, a future filled with the trust she had once thought impossible.